this is Kevin for Pixavert.com. In this video we're going to be creating this cool looking wallpaper, desktop wallpaper, and it's a very interesting design, not that complicated to make. You should be able to do this in any version of Photoshop, and the techniques will mainly cover stuff that we've done before, maybe also doing patterns. I don't think I've done patterns before, but we'll cover some basic techniques, but put them, I think, to pretty good use. So this is the original. I'm not going to be trying to make an exact copy of this. It's going to be roughly like this, but you know, you can go your own way, and I'm going to experiment with a few different things whilst I do this. I'm just going to take that and put that on another monitor, and this is another design, same design actually, but I've just put a texture over it, a cool looking texture, and I might do a separate video, quick separate video on this, and give you a link for the texture, which I think is one that works very well with this kind of design. But I definitely also want to do something in After Effects using shapes, and we'll be doing an animation that looks something like this, and as you can see, it's pretty neat, pretty elegant, and very easy to do inside of After Effects. So that will be a video that will be coming up soon. For the time being, we'll work on our wallpaper. So I'm going to choose File, New, and we are going to choose a width of 1920, 1080. Obviously, if your monitor is a different size, you can choose a different size. You'll need to make one or two changes to, well, you need to make several changes to the settings that we use. But I think, you know, it's a pretty easy, fun design to do, and it shouldn't be too much hassle to experiment. So we're going to call our document Wallpaper, desktop. Yeah, so this one, you should be able to do this in any version of Photoshop. There are some things that will work differently in CS6. I'll mention those as I go along if I can remember, but otherwise just leave a question in the comments, and you know, if you've got any questions about how something's done in your version of Photoshop, definitely leave a comment in the questions, email me, whatever, and I'll try and assist you there so that we can all work along. This is done definitely in any version of Photoshop. I think also the After Effects technique can be done in pretty much any version of After Effects, well, any recent version of After Effects. We are going to start off by creating a solid color layer. So with my background highlighted, I'm going to choose solid color, and the color that we're going for is going to be an orange, and let me see, hue is going to be 26, saturation let's say 56, brightness 75, so kind of a mid, not too violent orange, let me put it that way. And we'll then create another solid color layer. This one is going to be blue, so let's make that 213 for the hue, saturation 51, brightness 55. Again, you want to experiment, try different things, try your own colors. We're going to bring out some rulers, so I think we can pop them into the center like that, and they just snap into the center of the document. We're going to go to the blue, and we're just going to draw a rectangle around the top, and top half is selected. Again, the rectangle will just snap to these guides. We're going to create a layer mask on the blue, and next what we will do is to go to the orange. We can double click in this empty area here, go to pattern overlay, and we're going to choose a pattern called pink flex. Let me just right click, and pink with flex, that's what it's called. You'll find it in color paper. You might need to choose color paper and choose append or replace. We're going to cancel out, we're going to put that on multiply. Again, you can experiment with different textures and different patterns, but I think that looks pretty cool with this particular design. Let's move on. Let's select these two layers and group them, Control G. Let's call the group background main, and let's duplicate that group. Again, this is something you might need to do slightly differently in previous versions of Photoshop. We'll call this second group BG interior, and you'll see why shortly. We're going to zoom out. We're going to choose again the rectangle selection tool. We're going to draw a thin selection from one end to the other of the document. In CS6, when you make a selection, you get an indication of how tall the selection is. I want it to be around 120 pixels, 110 to 120 pixels. And if you're working in previous versions of Photoshop, just eyeball the amount. Then we're going to create a new solid color layer. That's going to be white, and we're done. That needs to actually go in the background main, so I'm going to drag that there, and then we can create our shape. So it's going to be a shape of a little boy, and what we do is just drag out the shape like that, holding down shift, so that it actually draws out in proportion. And we want it to cover that sort of central area of the left portion of the design. So that looks about fine. And this is one of those things that you do need to sort of make up your mind on at an early stage, because Photoshop is not going to be very forgiving if you want to change your mind later on the size of this thing. In After Effects, you don't have to commit yourself early on, but in Photoshop, the way Photoshop works, you do have to commit yourself quite early on. I'm going to use the white selection tool, the white direct selection tool, or the white arrow, to go here, and I'm going to select the points inside of this area here. This area here, I don't think looks too good when we design it, when we use it in this design. So I'm going to select as many of the points in that area as I can without selecting any other, and delete. Then just select this guy down here, and there's two more to go. Just bring them out there and delete. What I want to do now is to design the patterns we're going to use throughout this project. So we are going to get rid of the rulers, Control R, View Clear Guides, Control or Command R to get rid of the rulers. And what we'll now do is to create a new document for our patterns. So we're going to create a document of 8 pixels by 8 pixels. And this is another area where you definitely want to experiment a little bit, because you can create as many patterns as you want and choose whichever one works best. That's our 8 pixels by 8 pixel document. Let's create a black background, solid color black, and let's create an empty layer. We're going to create those stripes that we saw running across the original design. You saw all these stripes. These are all created using patterns. Let me just move to this tool here. No, let me move to the pencil tool. And with the pencil tool, what we want to do is to choose any of these brushes, just reduce the size of the brush to 1 pixel. So we'll go down to 1 pixel, and then we're going to make our background, our foreground, a gray of 00 for the hue and saturation, 58 for the brightness. We're going to choose an opacity of 66%. We've got an empty layer, black background, and we are going to draw on the empty layer with our pencil. So we've got the pencil selected, 1 pixel, 66%, 66% opacity, 58% gray. Again, you may want to experiment, but I'm going to click in the top right hand corner and shift click in the bottom left hand. Take the opacity down to 40%, then just put a couple of lines next to that main line. I'm going to leave it like that, just switch off the background, but if you want to, you can do something like that. I think that produces a subtly different pattern, or you can experiment. You know, you might want to add a few points there and just experiment and see what works for you. But I'm going to undo those couple of changes and just go ahead with this. We're going to switch off the background, and I'm going to choose Edit, Define Pattern, and we'll call this Video Pattern 1. Give it whatever name you're going to remember. We'll hit Enter, and then we'll go to Image, Rotation, and choose Flip Horizontal. Then once again we'll go to Edit, Define Pattern, and video pattern 2. Now we can actually close this document, we don't need it anymore, and we can now come here. I'm going to click on the adjustment layer icon, choose pattern, and the last pattern that we created should be selected. So I'm going to hit OK, and we are going to call this one main pattern. I'm going to create a second pattern adjustment, and this time we'll choose the previous one that we created, which is this guy, and we'll hit OK, and that creates our second layer. We'll call that interior pattern. Then we go to the shape layer. I'm going to call the shape original. We're not going to use this except to make copies, and what we will do is to alt click on the shape. I'm going to control click on the shape. That turns the shape into a selection. You can see the marching ants there, and we're going to go down to the BG interior group and add a layer mask. Next, I'm going to alt click on that layer mask, or option click on the layer mask and drag it to interior pattern. Then I'm going to alt click or option click and drag it down to the main pattern, and over there I'm going to hit Control I on the layer in order to invert it, and then we'll alt drag that copy down to the background main, and that gives us the beginning of our completed design. So we've now got the patterns evident. What you should see is inside of the cutout here we've got, or inside of the shape, we've got the patterns moving one way, and in the main document the patterns are moving in the opposite direction. Again, you can experiment with different settings and different patterns, whatever pleases you. We're going to go to the original and turn down the fill opacity to 0, and next what we will do is to make a duplicate copy, Control J. We're just going to keep that there for reference and for making further duplicates as and when we need them. So I'm going to take this new copy and I think drag it above all the other layers. There we are going to double click and input some settings for the inner shadow and also for the drop shadow. So let's just see if I can. I'm going to accept the default settings and just move this so that we can see what we're doing a bit more clearly. Let's open this up and do some edits. So the drop shadow looks a bit ridiculous, so we'll change that first. We'll change that to soft light, and maybe let's change that to normal. Change the color to white. You can see that's going to add a little bit of depth to our shape and start beginning to create that cutout effect. We're going to choose a distance, let's say 6, spread of 0 and a size of 6. We're going to choose 120 for the angle, and global light is selected. The opacity can go down maybe to 60%, and after all we'll change that to soft light. We're going to go to the inner shadow. The inner shadow looks cool, doesn't it? That really helps to define this shape. We're going to choose color burn, and we'll take the opacity down to around 45%. Again, we're going to use global light, a distance of, let's say, 9, 0 choke, 9 size. That adds this intense color and darkness, and we'll hit OK to that. Next, I'm going to take some of the color out of this design, and I'm going to bring in that white bar. What happened to that white bar? Let's go down to our background main. There is our white bar. Let's drag that up to the top. We can see it now. I was missing that. Let's now go back up to the top, and I'm going to take out some color. Again, this is just my fancy. You can do something different if you want. I'll take the hue down to -25 using a hue saturation layer. We'll call that layer desaturate. We'll create a curves layer, and we'll call that contrast. And I'm just gonna drop the shadows right down like that and raise the highlights just a little bit. Now again, you can do what you prefer at this stage. If you like the colors that we're getting, just keep it like that. If you don't like the colors, you can change this to luminosity, and that just tones down those colors. I'm going to change the hue saturation to color. That doesn't make much of a change, but you know, I know which colors I want, so that's how we got them. We're gonna now make a number of really weird but wonderful edits. We're gonna alt drag the original to the top. No, not this guy. We'll call this. Let's undo that. Okay, we've got the original down here. We'll call this layer layer effects. Layer effects 1. We're going to create 3 more layer effects layers. So I'm going to alt drag the original, which has no layer effects. We'll drag that to the top, and we'll actually rename that layer effects group. And we're going to make 3 copies of that. So Control J or Command J twice, select all 3 and group them. So I'm going to hit Control or Command G on the keyboard, and we'll call that group layer effects. And we're going to make some really subtle changes to the design here, or at least a couple of really subtle changes. In the background layer effects group layer, I'm going to double click, bring up the layer effects, and we want the drop shadow. We want here to be using color dodge and white, so that's an intense highlight there. Once again, we're using an angle of 120 with global light. The distance is going to be 0 and the size is going to be 6. We'll take the opacity down to around 50%, and that's a really subtle change. We'll hit OK to that. We'll go to the second layer, double click, and here we're going to choose a linear burn. No, we'll choose normal. Go down to drop shadow and choose linear burn, and we'll choose an angle which is 180, the opposite of this. So I'm going to switch off global light and just take this 180, that's minus 60, and we are going to have a distance of 0, spread of 0, and a size of 5. The color is going to be black. So that's a very typical drop shadow, and that's just cooling down some of that highlight that we created. We'll take the opacity all the way down to around 30%. So that's another really subtle edit, and I'll hit OK. We'll go to the top layer now, again bring up the layer styles, and here we're going to choose color overlay, choose black, choose soft light, and an opacity of 26. That just helps to create a little bit of depth in that cutout. So we've got a bit of a shadow there, as though this is a little bit in the shadows. We're going to create another inner shadow. This one is going to be a lot more dramatic. We'll put this on multiply. The color is going to be black. Opacity will go down to 50%, and then we'll go and create a fairly huge shadow. So this is the idea of having a really dark shadow underneath and then a slightly brighter shadow or a slightly softer shadow above it. So I'm going to go for distance of 16, size of, I don't know, 18. Let's take the distance up to about 26. Size 21. Experiment with different settings. You know, you might get something that looks better than this. Let's take the opacity down just a bit. 41. You can always come and edit this. This is the really cool thing about layer effects. If you don't like the overall result, just come back and edit them. So I'm going to go with that. Multiply that to 9%. Global light on 26, 0, 21. Let's hit OK. And that's it for our layer effects, and that's produced a really cool looking cutout effect. So what I want to do now is to finish off. We're going to create a kind of a gradient to finish off. We're going to choose a gradient adjustment. We're going to choose black to white, and linear is fine, scale 100, angle is going to be 90 degrees, that's fine. We'll put this on linear light, and then we'll take down the fill opacity. There's a lot of fill opacity editing in this video. We'll take the fill opacity down to 12%, and we'll call that shadow highlight. It's kind of adding a shadow to the lower part of the design, a highlight to the top. We're going to duplicate that, and again another really subtle edit. We'll bring this up. Again, we're going to choose a black to white gradient, but we'll choose radial and reverse it. And this time I'm going to drag the gradient up to the top. Choose an angle of around 0, or exactly 0, and then just increase the scale. I think in every version of Photoshop you can go up to 250, in CS6 you can go all the way up to 1000, but 250 should be fine. And that just adds that little bit of a highlight to the top, which I think looks really cool. Let's finish off. I'm going to create a color balance adjustment, and what we're going to do here is just to play around with the shadows and highlights a bit more. Let's start off by going to the shadows. I think the most dramatic edit is probably going to be in the shadows. Maybe not. Let's leave that there. I'm trying to remember what I did. Let's go to midtones and take the midtones from red towards cyan. And that's going to be a fairly dramatic edit, I think. -17, -20, something like that. And that knocks a lot of, I think it takes some of the saturation out of the background, out of it's not now a bit more brown than orange, isn't it? So it knocks a bit of color out of the lower part of the image, maybe kind of almost intensifies the top part, but certainly takes it towards a more kind of cyan green area. We'll keep that for the shadows. Let's go to the highlights, and I think I want a bit of warmth in the highlights. So what we'll do is shift this towards the red and shift the blue towards the orange, just slightly. We're talking about single figures here, and we're going to take the magenta green slider and just shift it slightly towards the green. Then we'll go to the shadows, and I can't remember what I did with the shadows. I think I actually made them a little bit cooler. So we slide towards cyan fair amount, -10, -11, towards magenta just a couple of points, -2, and we'll slide towards the blues about 7. Preserve luminosity is ticked. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is it. That's the final document. And there's our desktop wallpaper. So that's basically it. Like I say, you can experiment and try different stuff. You know, use different patterns, different blending modes. You know, it's you know, use different shapes. I'll have a link to the shape that I used here, but yeah, I hope you find that useful. I think it's a cool looking little design, nothing special, but you know, pretty neat. So we'll leave it at that, and yeah, thank you for watching. Till next time, take care, bye.